Okay, so VA seller paid closing costs and concessions. So VA has a unique way of classifying the two into two separate categories. One being just the closing cost, which there's no cap, and one being the seller concession, which is a max of 4% of the sales price. So the definition of what a seller concession is, it's very defined by VA. Anything of value added to the transaction by the builder or seller for which the buyer pays nothing additional and which the seller is not customarily expected or requested to pay or provide. So when you have customary closing cost, that's your appraisal, your title, your credit, your survey, any origination points, lender fees. That is your customary closing cost on a transaction. You can actually include in closing cost up to 2% in discount points if you have to discount the rate. So those are your traditional customary closing costs that VA says the seller can pay all of it. It doesn't matter how much it is. If it's 20 grand, it's 20 grand if it's customary closing cost. So there's not a cap on that. Now your seller concessions has a cap. It's 4% of the sales price. Of that 4%, you can have things paid and go towards for the benefit of the buyer. So you can have the funding fee paid in full out of that concession. You can prepay the taxes and the insurance of the escrow account. You can do a gift. I've never seen this. A gift from a builder, television, microwave oven, things of arbitrary value, I guess. Now, payment of extra points to provide a permanent interest rate buy down. Any points that exceed the 2% that are customary can go in that bucket. So if you, I mean, we don't see this, but you've seen other companies charge over and above in discount points that they're going to need the seller to pay for because they don't have enough money from the concession. So, but you can go over that 2%. It has to go into that seller concession bucket though. Provision of escrowed funds to provide temporary interest rate buy down. So you can have your closing costs that you need customarily, right? No cap. And then you have additional money that you need for the temporary rate buy down programs that are available. Those dollars go into that bucket. They're not part of the closing cost. I know there's even sometimes I get confused between closing costs and concessions because we use the terminology, we need seller concessions, but it's seller paid closing cost. If you look on the contract, it defines what that is in that section of the contract. The seller concession is an additional area in the contract that we can have the realtor or whatever negotiate and manually put that in special provisions of the dollar amount that's needed. You can have any of those dollars go towards paying off credit card balances or any judgments against the buyer, the VA buyer. So if you've got a debt ratio issue or a net residual income problem or challenge rather, you can have concessions negotiated and have those dollars go directly towards that debt at close to get that ratio down, to get the loan to work or to get that residual to be met. The next one, break apartment lease or rent. I've seen this with my buddy Charles. He's done this a handful of times where if they've got to break a lease and they don't have the monies or they know they can use those concessions towards the dollar amount it's going to take to break that lease early, that is something that it can be put into that bucket for. That's a pretty cool feature. Again, the discount points cannot exceed the 2% of the loan amount. Well, I say can't. If it does exceed the 2% of the loan amount, it's going to become a concession bucket. So any dollars over and above that becomes a concession. Do not include normal discount points in payment of the buyer's closing costs in the concession amount when you determine that 4%. Again, 4% is the seller concession max. Again, closing costs. So closing costs, again, there's no cap. customary to the loan transaction. Again, we discussed the origination, credit, survey, anything that's your traditional closing cost to get the loan is what's considered by VA as a closing cost. So in this example, if you got a certain percentage of closing costs, that's 2%, and you've got other items in the other bucket for concessions that are 3%, you're at 5%. You're over what we think in our head max is 4%, which is not. You can negotiate that or have the agent negotiate that with the seller to get those items paid for. So it's important, as we're talking about this, that if we're putting a loan together and we're tied on certain things ratio wise or net residual, when we run that DU, this is a way to correct that. This is a way to fix that. And this would be the basis of our approval if we can get the agent to negotiate with the seller these additional items to help that ratio work. And that's pretty much it. Were there any questions on that? See, in the break lease, is that put on the CD and able to be paid directly to the third party? That would be, yes. There's no money exchanged at all. It's all going to be done on the CD. So any debts, any judgments, any lease, we would have to actually document what that amount is and pay directly to. So because all that's going to come out of the seller's proceeds. So when we're negotiating, when we have a VA buyer, like I said earlier, if we're running into a challenge, we have the capability of doing other things that products don't allow us to do. Are there lender overlays on the amount of seller paid closing costs? We see funding conditions that state max for. No, we got to go back to the circular and tell the underwriter there's not a max for closing cost. There's a max for seller concessions. The circular and the guides in the 26.7 clearly state what I just went over. And we would just have to point that out to the underwriter. So going back to structuring that loan, structuring it to where we have the dollars possibly to make that loan work if we get concessions and or closing costs or the combination of the two. It's going to be up to how well your realtor can negotiate that offer. If the offer makes sense, do we have enough room to do that? Because you still have to have that house. You wouldn't really have to have that house appraised for that. You traditionally would, right? The seller doesn't net out less, but at the end of the day, in the market that we're in, this is a leverage that the buyer has these days. Okay. No other questions on that? This is a really good thing to get out and have conversations with your realtors. And when we're discussing getting VA approvals with our buyers, that this is an option to help get their ratios down and get some debt paid off. My example that I used was last month. We paid off about 10 grand in credit card debt to get the ratio and residual to work, and the rest went towards the closing cost to lower his cash to close. So it was something that the buyer's agent negotiated with the seller. We had room to do that. In this particular example, we had 20 grand over list price on the appraisal, so we had some room there to play with, but it ended up working out for both the buyer and seller at the end of the day. Okay. Well, I hope this was helpful. Again, all these, what I just went over is in the 26.7 circular, basically their guidebook for VA. So if we run into a situation with an underwriter, it's something that needs to be pointed out to them, that there is no cap and there's no overlays. That is a VA. VA will guarantee that loan with how that loan is set up with their guides. So there should not be an issue on that. Other than that, I thank you for joining. If you have any questions, you can always reach out. I'm going to put my my link tree on here. If you ever want to get in touch with me or want to go to Linktree, there's links on there that will tell you some additional information about VA as well. Other than that, I thank you for your time and you guys have a great day. We'll talk to y'all soon.